Honored guests, we are here to solve a murder. No, not that murder. This murder.
Who has offed this most tenacious of garments? Who could commit such a heinous crime against fashion and function both? Who has killed the corset? Ah, corsets. The horrible torture devices that constrained and restricted generations of women to the fainting couch, until the 1920s came along and universally freed us all from the tyranny of tiny waists. I think most of us will know by now that there's a lot more to that story, and if you don't, oh boy, do I have some videos for you. But what if I told you that the corset didn't die in the 1920s? It faked its own death, went into hiding, and lived a quiet, covert, anonymous life for another 40 years. Welcome to SnappyDragon Studios, where we love a good murder mystery. I'm V, fashion historian who loves both corsets and 21st century undergarments. The mythos of corsetry and tight lacing has been talked to death, ha ha, on historical costuming YouTube. So I wanted to look more closely at how the corset finally went out of fashion for daily wear. It was a much longer process than we imagine, and it turns out to have just as much to do with marketing as it does with liberation and changing trends. Sorry if my voice sounds a little off, I'm getting over a cold. It's not the plague, thank goodness, I checked, but it has meant spending a lot more of the past week in bed than usual. But I would like to thank Birch Living, the sponsor of this video, who have provided me with an exceptionally comfy mattress that made being in bed with a cold a lot less unpleasant than it could be. Birch Living crafts mattresses and sleep products with organic and natural materials that have been sustainably sourced. Their mattresses are free from polyurethane foams and fiberglass, and instead use natural materials to accomplish the same things those potentially harmful materials are used to do. For instance, Birch uses 100% organic wool for its flame-resistant properties instead of fiberglass, which has the added bonus of being hypoallergenic and biodegradable. My Birch Luxe mattress has one of the longest list of third-party environmental and safety certifications I've ever seen on a textile product. GOTS certified, Green Guard Gold, Fair Trade, Forest Stewardship Council. I've had this mattress for over a year and it has spoilt me completely. The Luxe mattress is made of 8 different layers of organic wool, organic cashmere, organic cotton, and 100% natural latex. The quilted pillow top is the perfect level of cushy to avoid pressure-sensitive muscles from getting uncomfortable. If you're already in bed with a cold, the last thing you need is sore muscles too. But it's not super squishy or low support. The mattress has over 1,000 individually wrapped steel coils and targeted zoned lumbar support. So whether I'm actually sleeping or propped up on pillows reading old issues of the Delineator, my back will be as happy and pain-free as possible. If your mattress works for you, as well as mine does for me, you can look forward to many years of great sleep thanks to the 25-year warranty. And if not, Birch offers a 100-night sleep trial. The delivery experience is also super easy. They brought it to my door, rolled up in a box, and my disabled self needed only minimal help to unpack and set it up. For bonus convenience, Birch also offers in-home setup and removal. I love my Birch mattress, and I think you would too. If you're looking for a new bed, check out Birch Living. Visit birchliving.com/SnappyDragon to get 20% off a Birch mattress, plus 2 free eco-rest pillows, and to support the channel. As usual, to talk about corsets, we need to define our terms. Although the word corset only came into use in the 19th century, boned and stiffened support garments go back as far as the late 16th century. So even though neither the boned girdle bodices of 16th century fashion, nor the built-in stays of high-class 17th century gowns, nor the conical stays that supported the shape of 18th century fashion were called corsets at the time, they are considered types of corsetry. So what makes something corsetry? I would argue that a garment constructed using stiffened material, whether that be boning, cording, or sizing, treating fabric with something that makes the material itself stiffer, and intended to provide some combination of bust support, shaping, waist compression, and the correct silhouette for outer clothes, falls under the umbrella of corsetry. Let's set the scene. In the earlier 1900s, corsets have shifted only slightly in shape from the styles of the 19th century. Still the same general principles: bust support, waist compression ranging from minimal to dramatic, according to the style, creating a fashionable hourglassy shape for clothes to go over. But a combination of changing fashions that favored what's called an S-bend silhouette rather than a perfectly straight posture, and many years of flailing debate over the health risks or benefits of corsetry resulted in the straight front corset. There are some structural differences, yes, and ironically the S-bend is actually horrible for your lower back, but none of that is relevant for our purposes right now. I might just have to do a future video on all the ways health corsets were not always great for the health. The important part is that the straight front corset still had a dramatic hourglass shape with a full bust, nipped-in waist, and dramatic hip carve. This is our starting point for the corset's death throes. Around 1908, several prominent couture design houses like Poiret and Lucille began creating designs that took inspiration from the Regency period of fashion. These dresses were extremely different. The exaggerated hourglass shape with its intense curves was replaced by a straight up and down silhouette and high empire waistline. However, unlike the dresses of the Regency period, these could be extremely clingy through the hip and skirts, and the silhouette took over fashion, corsets changed shape to suit it. There was much less emphasis on compressing the waist through corsetry, but a lot more on compressing and straightening out the entire figure. Now, here's the issue with that. Waists are squishy. They're often the squishiest part of the human torso, because on most people, there's a bit of space between the lower ribs and the top of the pelvis. And if you compress there, you're not squeezing any bones. The new post-1908 straighter corsets put less pressure on the waist, but more on the hips and even down over the upper thighs to create that slim, straight silhouette under the newly fashionable hobble skirts. And all of those places do have bones. And while there was a world of difference between the extreme high fashion styles worn under couture dresses and the ordinary styles worn by people who had to work, long line straight corsets like this were much harder to adapt for comfort, movement, and physical labor than previous styles. As Poiret himself said in his autobiography, "It was in the name of liberty that I proclaimed the fall of the corset. Yes, I freed the bust, but I shackled the legs." Cue World War I, which is where we normally see much discussion of women doing vastly more physical labor and work outside the home, requiring them to stop wearing corsets entirely. This is somewhat true, but there's more going on than that. Who here is familiar with the dress rationing that took place during World War II, where you could only have so much fabric in a skirt and needed ration coupons to buy new clothes and such? Well, some of that happened during World War I as well. I'm not an expert on the actual rationing systems, that's a whole other thing, but the military's need for resources like metal and rubber meant that manufacturing of corsets was reduced in many cases. Warner Brothers Corset Company, one of the leading US manufacturers at the time, stopped producing corsetry at all when the United States entered the war in 1917. The amount of metal they weren't putting into undergarments was roughly enough to have created 2 battleships. To maintain their business in undergarments, they marketed newly developed fabric brassieres much more heavily, since these materials weren't being taken up by the war effort. As for corsets not being suitable for war work, that's also not always for reasons of mobility. Many women were employed making munitions during World War I, and in these factories, no one was allowed to wear any metal on their person in case it struck a spark. No hooks and eyes, no metal fastenings, and no corsets, even if you had other clothes on over them. During this period, corset manufacturers were filling their industry's trade journals with panic that corsets were going out of fashion. However, these trade journal articles don't give any statistics to support their fears of a drop in sales. And considering how rationing was affecting corset production, even halting it, how meaningful would these statistics even be? What I would really like to see is data on corset sales from, say, 1913 versus 1919, but I'm not sure that data actually exists. A lot of what follows from here is my analysis because I could not find as much writing on social attitudes about corsetry in the 20s as I would like. I did a lot of searching and kept finding even more academic papers about fetish corsetry in the interwar period. Fascinating, but not what I'm here to talk about. 1920s fashion and attitudes about the new shape of women's wear were characterized by a strong sense of contrast between clothes from even 10 years earlier and the present styles. High fashion clothes in 1910 had been slim, yes, but it took a while for even that change to trickle down to the average person. Photos of crowds and working class people from 1910 and 11 still show fluffy blouses with bishop sleeves, emphasis on an hourglass waistline, and trumpet-shaped skirts. One of the major selling points of 1920s clothes was just how different they were. It was fashionable to set yourself apart from the past, and certainly from pre-World War I fashions and social attitudes. As said in the paper Samson and Delilah Revisited, which analyzes the political nature of 1920s fashions and hairstyles in France, because the new look contrasted with that of the turn of the century, it represented a visual declaration of sudden change in women's lives. Wearing something old-fashioned just wasn't cool. And the corsets of the old-style hourglass-shaped variety, those were very old-fashioned. World War I had reduced the number of people wearing corsets, yes. But like I said earlier, I've not seen any numbers put on how much, nor what criteria was used to determine what was a corset or not. As well as the issues of rationing and production during the war, the paper Fighting the Corsetless Evil by Jill Fields contextualizes the drop as part of a general economic depression in the very early 20s. She notes that underwear sales, not including corsets, dropped 50% between 1920 and 1921, but corset sales remained stable during that same time frame, with even a small increase by 1923. And it's not that 1920s fashions didn't have a silhouette that many people's bodies needed foundation garments to achieve. They just did the opposite of what Edwardian-era hourglass corsets did. Instead of lifting the bust, nipping in at the waist, and emphasizing the curve of the hips, the 1920s look involved smoothing and flattening the bust, straightening the waist, and smoothing the hip curve as much as possible. Unless you happened to be naturally tall, slender, and boyish of figure. So corsets were still being sold and used during the 1920s. The Sears Roebuck catalog is one of my favorite sources for what ordinary people were buying and using, and it's got a wealth of examples. Depending on your figure and needs, you could find anything from a fairly minimal suspender belt to smooth your waist and hold up your stockings, to a full body shaper that flattened the bust into place, straightened the waist, had an extra internal girdle to smooth the stomach, and extended all the way down to the upper thigh. I don't know about you, but I think I would find it easier to move in my Edwardian corset than in these. I also went through the women's magazine The Delineator and found a few interesting ads and articles. In the March 1920 issue, there are 7 ads for corsets, spread throughout the issue using all the terminology we recognize from earlier eras. This includes one for a maternity corset and one for a spine-straightening corset brace, which, as a person with scoliosis, I have some feelings about. Click over there if you want to hear them, plus see me sew something similar but less ableist for my own spine. By 1925, the Delineator has maybe 1 corset ad per issue, smaller and in the back section, and often using other terms like corselet. If we look at the terminology as the 1920s went on, a pattern emerges. In 1925, the Sears Roebuck catalog still calls this department corsets and refers to certain individual garments as corsets too. From 1926 onward, the department header says corsetry, but now none of the items themselves are called corsets. Depending on style, they're called foundation garments, combination garments, girdles, and so on. By the end of the decade, the Sears Roebuck catalog wasn't even calling the department corsetry. Since their whole purpose was to sell product, they had determined that it was less profitable to use the word corset for any of these items, no matter what the garments themselves did or were made out of. It's not that corsetry methods weren't being used. Check out this girdle from the 1930s. It's got steel boning, lacing, all the things we would expect to see on a piece of corsetry. It fits the definition we laid out earlier, but corsets were old-fashioned. Corsets were not stylish. Corsets were something from a time before the 1920s came along and improved women's rights, although perhaps did not improve them quite as much as they get credit for. Corsets were not something you wanted to wear, not if you were a modern, fashionable person in the 1920s or 30s. That boned, stiffened, supportive garment that shaped your waist, that's not a corset. It's a girdle. Fighting the Corsetless Evil notes that trade journals also discuss the importance of renaming corsets as girdles in order to shake off passé connotations. So this was a very intentional marketing campaign. In order for corsetry to survive, the industry thought, the word corset had to die. Girdles, suspender belts, foundation garments, all of these kinds of shapewear were commonly used through the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and even into the 1960s, depending on what trends you followed. In what I find a truly amusing moment of fashion being cyclical, some of these styles were even called bodies, which is what the very earliest styles of corsetry back in the 16th century were called. They used newer textile technologies, it's true. Smaller amounts of elastic had been incorporated into corsets as early as the 1880s, but elastic panels and fabrics were now standard and widely used. Lacing also became less and less common, probably because it was more labor intensive to produce, more likely to show under clothes, and if you had enough elastic, you didn't need the adjustability that lacing provided. But corsetry wasn't dead, it was in hiding. The corset, in the face of changing social norms and a need for effective marketing, had faked its own demise. It proceeded to live out the next 4 decades in quiet but widespread anonymity. Seriously, what else do you think gave us the cinched waistlines of late 40s and 50s couture? If we want to talk about what killed the corset for real, we should be talking about the radical fashion changes of the 1960s and 70s, but that would take a whole other video, and thanks to aforementioned cold, my voice is far too tired. I hope you enjoyed this little murder mystery rant because I certainly enjoyed investigating it. I'm hoping to do another deep dive into how the social attitudes of the 20s and 30s shaped the myths we have about corsetry, so hit the subscribe button to make sure you see that when it comes out. While you're down there, tell us your stories about definitely not a corset shapewear, and hit the like button to tell YouTube you liked what you saw. If you want to, maybe, sometimes, if you're lucky, get notified when I post stuff, ring the bell too, and hope for the best. You can find me around the internet at Miss SnappyDragon on Instagram, Facebook, and very occasionally TikTok, and my annotated bibliographies are available at patreon.com/SnappyDragonStudios. Now, I need to go make another pot of tea and rest my voice. See you next time!
Is no one looking? Can I get up now?